10-hour
Yeah,
training, we're condensing it.
We're condensing it for you.
Smashing it into 8 hours, so we don't have time to stop after every module. But when we take breaks, or even before next week, you want to think about each module that we talked about and how you're going to apply what we're talking about and the tools that we talk about. We talked about the middle models of poverty, middle class, and wealth. And what I'm going to talk about is the causes of poverty. It's really important before we start developing strategies to help people come out of their situation and to become more self-sufficient. It's really important that we understand what causes poverty, or we'll be unable to create strategies that are going to be successful. So we're going to talk about those. And I want to do something first. If you would just turn your PowerPoint over or grab another sheet of paper, and I'm just going to give you a couple of minutes, and I want you to write down, there's no right or wrong answers, what you think causes poverty. You don't have to share it with anybody, but just write down what you think causes poverty. So what I want you to do is just set that aside for a minute, and as we go through the causes of poverty and the research continuum, we'll kind of pull that back out and look at it. But it's important that you kind of see where you're coming from, because remember, like Caroline talked about, we might have a mental model in our mind of poverty that doesn't quite fit. So you kind of have to suspend that a little bit. So keep that to the side there, and we're going to pull it back. There are times throughout history that the poverty rate has been a little bit smaller, and there's times that it's gotten really kind of out of control and grown. And when that happens and the poverty rate gets really high, countries know that they cannot sustain themselves, and something has to be done. And so what do? We start doing research, and we start really trying to take a look at what is causing this and what is causing poverty. And so Philip Duvall, who is one of the authors of Bridges Out of Poverty, took a really hard look at what do we research? What are the things that we are looking at that we think cause poverty? And what he discovered is that there are kind of 4 areas. Sorry, I forgot to change the slide. There are kind of 4 areas that we tend to research. One of those is individual behaviors. Another is absence of human and social capital within the community. And then you have human exploitation and political and economic structures. One of the problems is that we tend to lean toward one of these, or maybe 2 of these, and we don't look at all of them. So there's really nothing comprehensive about reducing poverty in the United States. We tend to grab onto these research studies, and there may be a correlation here, and we jump on and we develop a program. An example of that would be back, I believe it was late 90s. There was a correlation it showed between poverty and single parenthood, and there was all this money that was thrown into out of wedlock births and teen pregnancies, and this is not a bad thing. In fact, the teen pregnancy rate did drop. I know in our county, because it just so happens to be something I worked on back then. It did drop in our county, and really has continued to drop. So it's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just that that's not very comprehensive. We may have reduced teen pregnancy a little bit, but as soon as the political winds changed, all the funding went away. And so all of those programs kind of stopped. And so what our goal is in teaching Bridges Out of Poverty is to get you to look at all of these reasons that cause poverty. And we're not saying it's either or, we're saying it's both and it's all of these. So we wanted to take a hard look at each one of these. So the first area is individual behaviors. And when we're talking about individual behaviors, we're talking about the choices and the lifestyle habits of the individual. And this is one of the things that does cause poverty, just one of the things. We may talk about things like dependency and entitlement. We may think of welfare, and we think of things like, you know, do policies actually cause people to kind of become dependent sometimes? You know, sometimes it kind of keeps people in that situation. Or are they, you know, really entitled? We kind of look at that. We look at bad behaviors like drugs, alcohol, gangs. Unfortunately, a person's support system may be a gang. So they may have a support system, but it's a negative one. So we look at all those behaviors. We look at work ethic and values, and we're going to talk a whole lot in the hidden rules about the hidden rules of work, that sometimes an individual who's grown up in an environment of poverty and is living in the tyranny of the moment may actually not know those rules. And so they may have problems with work ethic. There's breakup of families and single parenthood that we sometimes talk about. And there is a correlation, of course, between single parenthood and poverty. However, it may not be the fact that, which a lot of people would jump on and say, well, it's, you know, single parents are less effective or they're not working. And that's actually not the case. It's just a matter of how many incomes do you have coming into the home. So how many incomes does it take now to be middle class? Two, three, you know. It takes several incomes to be middle class, and so sometimes it's very difficult. It's just a matter of you only have one income coming into the household. Also, you have to look at addiction, mental health, and just in general health issues. There is a correlation between poverty and health issues, and it does seem to show that people who are in poverty tend to be less healthy, and that may not be necessarily because of lack of access. It may also be the sheer stress of living in poverty. Because if you think about living in that tyranny of the moment every day and the sheer stress of that, does stress take a toll on your body? Absolutely. And when you live in the tyranny of the moment, can you always get to doctor's appointments? Do you have the transportation? There's so many issues there, but it is something that does have to be addressed when we're looking at the causes of poverty. So let's take a look at some of the strategies within the individual behaviors. I'm gonna, do they have those handouts yet? No, they don't. If you would go ahead and hand the handout out for the welfare reforms. A lot of times you'll see strategies where there's work first or housing first.
Are these causes of poverty, or are these consequences of poverty?
Well, both.
I can see some of these go for both ways.
Absolutely.
And on my paper, I wrote little arrows that go one way or the other way.
Sure,
or together.
absolutely, absolutely. It's a little bit of both.
It seems to me that if you are poverty-stricken and you become addicted, you're in trouble.
Mm-hmm.
My nephew became addicted. His father paid $60,000 for him to go to treatment for 2 months.
Mm-hmm. So, and think about the mental models. You know how we put chemical dependency, mental health, all of that on all three mental models. The difference is how you deal with it and what resources that you have to deal with. Yeah. So, yeah.
But, you know, if you grow up in poverty and you lose your job, that's one thing. If you grow up middle class and you lose your job, well, you've got some basis to go find another one.
Sure. And we're going to go in depth in that, even when we talk about the hidden rules, about why that is, and
I guess
how
it was just that you're saying
it's a
these are
great
causes.
point. Sure. Yeah. Yeah. It's a little bit of both. So some of the strategies you might see are work first or housing first. Have you ever heard of the programs where you get them into housing first so they can then get into the work and all that stuff? Because when you're unstable and you're not in housing, it makes it very difficult. But you also may have work first programs like some of the food stamps and different things like that. All of these programs are going to kind of hold you accountable for the choices you make. And the handout that we gave you there, welfare reform came back in around, was it 2006? Or anyway. And then, what happened is they completely revamped the welfare system, and that affected people in many different ways. So you have two different ladies here on this. One of them is 30 years old. She's poor. She's a single mom. She has 4 children. And during this time, you have to work because it's a work first program. You absolutely have to work. You have to find employment. She's found 10 different jobs. She's gotten a job, lost a job, gotten a job, and lost a job. So it's kind of been this vicious cycle. And then you also have a woman on here who was 45, and she had 2 kids, ages 11 and 25. And she went to work for a company, was very successful, still works for that company, even relocated with this company when it moved to another city, and will probably retire from this company. So welfare reform had a lot of different effects. Now, when you see the statistics and people say, yes, the welfare rolls have reduced, don't let that fool you. That doesn't mean there's less people in poverty. Most of the people that we talk to on the phone in the clearinghouse do not even apply for Families First, which is what you call welfare here in Tennessee. So they don't even apply. It's just a different kind of poverty. It's just a different kind of poverty. It's not that all these people just became self-sufficient. So don't let that fool you. But there were some people that were able to be successful. What happened is that when you have a single mom like Michelle up at the top, she had 3 pretty young kids, and she probably had child care issues. So what happens is you're receiving welfare, Families First, as they call it here in Tennessee. You find employment, and you're doing really well. And so what they start to do is to reduce your benefits. And they do it a little bit transitionally. But your child care is covered. So when that stops after 18 months, then your child care stops. If you're not making a living wage, can you afford child care? No, you can't afford child care. So what ends up happening? You lose your job. No child care, lose the job, and the snowball continues. I can't tell you how many women that you see this happens to over and over again. So these are some of the strategies you might see. That when this was created, people that came to the table that had the best of intentions for welfare reform, and some people were successful. But one of the problems is they didn't have everyone at the table. Remember when Carolyn talked about the 3 Freds that have to be at the table? The Fred from poverty, from middle class, and from wealth. If everybody's at the table, you're better able to create policies that don't hurt one or the other. And a lot of times you can't see those consequences coming. So we always have these great intentions, but when you have everybody at the table, you're more likely to be able to identify what may happen if you do create this policy. So that's just a little bit about that. You also may see treatment interventions. When we talk about alcohol and drug abuse and we talk about treatment, there have been studies and research that's really shown us that there's a certain length of time that one needs to be in treatment. A lot of times here in our area, and I'm sure across the country, what their insurance covers isn't anywhere near that length of time. And so there are treatment interventions, but there are still issues with that have to be addressed. A lot of times they can't get the right treatment, or they can't get, like your person that was able to get into a program. A lot of times there's not even a program to get in, and there's not much available out there. So, but you may see programs like that. There may be literacy programs where folks are learning to read. You'll see a lot of abstinence education, marriage promotion, and comprehensive sexuality education, or some of the strategies that you might see in this area. So that was individual behaviors. Now we're going to switch to the next one, which is human and social capital in the community. And what I'm talking about when I talk about that is that our community, the community that we live in, has opportunities that help the citizens move ahead or get forward. They have, and we're going to talk about each of these things in a minute, but we're going to talk about living wage jobs and a sustainable community that we might have. If our community does not have these things in place where everyone can thrive, it can be really difficult. So let's look at some of the areas and examples here. There may be a lack of employment, but there also may be a lack of employment that is a full-time employment. A lot of jobs are maybe 30 hours a week or less, so they don't have to pay health insurance, things like that. We have a lot of people that we talk to who literally work at Burger King and then they go over and work a few hours at Taco Bell. I had one that worked at 3. fast food restaurants one time because she couldn't get enough hours at any one location. So
there's a lot of conversation on campus about our adjunct faculty. Many of them are in very, a similar situation. They can't earn a living wage.
Yeah.
And they don't have
Health insurance, yeah, and that makes it really difficult when you don't. You may talk about an example is a lack of education within the community, and it may not just be quality schools. It may be other things like trade schools, job training programs, and I don't mean job training programs that train you for a job that you make minimum wage, but job training programs where you actually learn a skill where you can get into good employment. Declining neighborhoods, safety issues that you may see. There's the middle class flight, and they call these donut cities. And it's if you see an area where the middle class takes off, they're moving into the suburbs and they're no longer in the city, which I think now a lot of times it's maybe changing somewhat. You see a lot of people moving downtown now. And moving to the neighborhoods downtown. So this may be changing a little bit, but what happened in a lot of cities, you had this little donut city where you had people in middle class who moved into the suburbs, and they took with them the tax base, which then, you don't have enough fire and police, you don't have the money for that. It took away some of the businesses and different things, and then you have these areas that just kind of collapses in on itself, and it can't be sustainable. And so that's called donut cities, which is caused by middle class flight. And then you also see a lack of career ladder and service knowledge sectors. Do you remember jobs before years ago where there were jobs where you could work your way up? You didn't necessarily have to have a specific degree or something like that, whether it be a manufacturing job or some type of job where you could really work your way up the ladder, and you may be able to make a pretty good wage and support yourself and have health care. There are fewer jobs like that today than there were years and years ago, which makes it very difficult. One that you can add to this is, that's not on there if you want to add, is emotional and psychological. Because there's a lot of loneliness and, with social media and everything, we're not kind of talking as much. We don't necessarily know our neighbors like we used to. There are some people that are really outgoing and really know their neighbors or whatever, but a lot of people kind of isolate themselves from their neighbors. And Robert Putnam, which he wrote a book that is listed in your reading list, but one of the things he talked about in his neighborhood is that when he went back to his old neighborhood, when he was little, used to be able to run across 12 backyards. And when he went back to that neighborhood, he would have hit 12 privacy fences. And so life has kind of changed a little bit. We kind of isolate ourselves a little bit. And then there's a whole lot of technology where we don't quite see each other as much. Do we have bowling leagues like we used to? No, a lot of the communities don't. We don't have as many things as we used to have.
I just want to say two things. I'm from Michigan, and that one at the bottom, that really hits home for me because obviously Motor City.
Yeah, absolutely.
And when most of those plants, like that, it was a culture that you would graduate from high school. My grandfather did it. My father chose to skip that path and do something a little bit different. But almost every man in my family went straight from high school to one of the big three.
Uh-huh.
And when that culture, Michigan had one of the lowest college completion rates in the country, but a stable middle class, because at 18 you would leave and you'd be making $30,000-$40,000 a year, and then when you retire at 50, you're making six figures.
Right.
And when all of those jobs went overseas, that's what happened to Detroit. That's a big thing a lot of people don't talk about. But the second thing is, number two, I just wanted to ask you what your thoughts were on this. The lack of education. I know in Michigan, our Governor Engler at the time got a lot of flack because with our Workforce program there were a huge amount of young ladies who were primarily women, because this is more of a single mother thing, but they were in school, and he made them quit school to go to work. But they were working jobs that were for $7.
Right.
So they were getting the training, but it was, if you want your benefits to continue to feed your family, school is not an option. So it was work or just get cut off. I mean, what do you think of that approach?
Yeah, well, I have pretty strong opinions, and I won't say all of them, but I think the education part is really, really important. You have to be really careful with that. We have a lot of folks that are jumping into programs that cost $20,000, $30,000 like a year, and they're getting and it's really putting people who are really struggling further and further behind. So with all the things that are coming up with Tennessee, yes, with all that, there is a great opportunity for people to go to school and really, really be successful. And so I always recommend schooling if you're in a situation that it's going to get you ahead. I don't think you can make when you make sweeping policies like that across the board and you don't take it case by case basis and really look at a person's situation, it's not going to be successful. It's going to hurt.
Like those programs were get you off of the taxpayer dollars as opposed to getting you out of poverty.
Right. It helped you manage poverty. That's what it was about. Helped you manage poverty for a minute, and then kick you off when your clock runs out, or whatever. But one of the things that you have to do, and it's so hard. Many times in social services, in the years in the past, we used to have programs, including programs like that were very cookie cutter, where you did the same thing for every single person. And you all have probably seen this with your students. You can't do cookie cutter things. You have to look at that student situation or at that individual who's in poverty, at their situation, and look at everything. If you don't, it's probably not going to be very successful. You have to look at their individual situations. And that's one of those sweeping things that that is not going to be successful. It's going to hurt a lot of people. It may be okay for some, but it's going to end up hurting a lot of people. Any other? Yes.
Another thing about the last one up there, well, both of them, because education's more important now, because even though a lot of jobs have indeed been sent overseas, the ones that are still here are done by robots. Mm-hmm. Like you say, they do the same thing over and over and over. They get a robot to do that now. Right. And so those jobs that were so repetitive, right, the factory jobs are not there.
Right.
You might have somebody there.
We're going to talk about that in political and economic structure as well. That's one of the key factors there. Great, absolutely great point. Same jobs aren't there. Yeah.
Even farmers. Farmers are different than they used to be.
Oh yeah.
Now you don't go out.
And just quickly too, you talked about the donut cities, and then you talked about sometimes now middle class is coming back, and I'm only just looking at this. Then they have the problem of gentrification, where they come back and they rebuild, these old houses like the 4th and Gill District. I think is a really good example of that. What happens is that drives up the rent, so the people who've lived there for 20 or 30 years can't afford it anymore.
Right. So
they're
property taxes, even if they own their house.
Yeah,
they can't afford it.
So it again, it's well intentioned, I think, sometimes.
Absolutely,
maybe in many cases, but it's very hurtful.
Right. Okay. So let's look at a few of the strategies. Some things that you might see communities do or programs created to do are to improve education, and programs like Head Start, enhancing skills, creating job training programs, things like that within the community. You'll also see employment strategies come into play, bringing more jobs to the area, also creating jobs that pay a living wage. And I'm going to have Carolyn give you a handout that has our current living wage on it while I'm talking here, and we'll take a look at that. And if you want to go ahead, Carolyn, and give out the rent one, as well as McDonald's, if you have McDonald's. That one, yes, right now, that one's the one we're going to talk about right now. But it's very important that we have jobs, that pay a living wage in our community, because we're just kind of setting people up for failure when we don't have that type of job available. And so the handout that Carolyn has given you tells you a little bit about what the living wage is, and these are the poverty guidelines. And the part in the blue there is the annual poverty guidelines rate, and these are are these 2014, Carolyn?
Yes.
Okay. So you'll see, and what it's done by is the number of people in the household. So if in other words, let's look at the first column there. If you're just one person that lives in the house, you're a single person that lives in the household, and your income is $11,670 or whatever below, that's the poverty line right there. And then the next green box you'll see there is what the living wage is, and this is actually for Knox County. The living wage for one adult would be $8.86. If you look over there all the way to the right, 2 adults and 3 children, the living wage would be $22.36 an hour. So you can see how a single mom, when you only have one income coming into the household, how it can be really difficult to find a job that actually pays, you know, a living wage in your area. And then the box over on the right is just in quintiles. It's the lowest 20, what the income is of the lowest 20%, the second 20%, the third, the fourth, and the highest, and then the top 5%. Yes.
It's just weird that you mentioned, like, if you're a single mom, you have to start paying for someone. I think also you might have to start paying for childcare from the first day that you work, and then wait to get paid. I know, like, for me, before I was full-time as an adjunct, I would work for a whole month at the beginning of every semester, paying childcare, because I've got 3 kids.
Yeah.
So I'd have, you know, spent between $600 and $1,000 on childcare before I got that first paycheck.
Yeah.
And you finally get paid, and then it all just disappears, paying back what you already owe in childcare for what you've already had.
Yeah.
And so even when you do have that job, it's very hard to get ahead because you're constantly scrambling to make up that cost of
Right.
childcare from the beginning, and you start off with that deficit.
Yeah. And you can imagine how much harder that would be if, say, you only get 25, 30 hours a week sometimes. Because what I hear a lot of folks tell me when they call in is, my hours were reduced this week, or my hours were reduced a few weeks ago and now I got a little bit more hours. If your hours are varying, how do you balance that child care and being able to pay for it? It's really difficult to do, and what ends up happening is they end up losing the child care because they get so behind on it, and then the job, and then the whole thing snowballs. So that's just a little information about the living wage. All the different programs go by a little bit different. Like food stamps does a certain percentage of the poverty guideline. So every program is kind of different on how somebody qualifies. The next handout that you had, which is very interesting, and this was actually from 2013, but this is the number of hours needed at minimum wage to afford market rent. So it's not income-based or anything like that, it's market rent. And you'll see in Tennessee, the number of hours that you would have to work is 76 hours in order to afford market rent. That would be if you were one person, yeah.
We're one of the lowest states.
Yeah, yeah. And so that's really hard. Oftentimes what you will see when we talk to folks on the phone, one of the very first things that we ask them is, tell me about your income and tell me about how much your rent is. Because we want to take a look at what that percentage is. Because a lot of times when you have people in poverty, they're paying as much as 50 to 70% of their income on their rent, which is really, really difficult. Now you want to try to get them in income-based housing, but there's a lack of income-based housing. It's very difficult to get in right now. The waiting lists are very long, and so sometimes you kind of have people stuck and they're having to pay market rent, and it's really a big burden when it's that percent of your income is going just to your rent. You really shouldn't be paying more than 30% of your income on your housing. So that's just a little more information. And then you have a handout on McDonald's. You know, this has now been taken off their website because so many people.
I'm wondering where you're going to find a mortgage for $600.
Yeah, well, there's lots of things like about this budget. This is a sample budget that McDonald's put on their website for their employees, and it's really quite funny because on what planet do you pay $20 for health insurance, and on what planet do you pay $0 for heating, you know, utilities? And then this would be actually if you were full time, and the income. Yeah, and it's 2 jobs. So anyway, so it was really kind of humorous. They were trying to show, you know, how they could survive, but it's really very difficult. That's just kind of an example that you can see. One of the things that I read the other day that I thought was a step in the right direction was that Walmart has made the decision to start paying their employees at a living wage. And so it may not equal a living wage in each area because the living wage is different in each area, but they're going to be paying them more than the minimum wage. And so I just read that article, and you know, Walmart has been very publicly criticized for having the most employees that receive public assistance and not paying their employees a living wage and some benefit issues and things like that. But this is a step in the right direction, no matter what the reason is. It may be for publicity to help that. It doesn't matter what the reason. It will be beneficial to their employees. To be making even a few dollars more an hour can make a big difference for somebody who is a single mom and has 2 kids. Okay, so so full-time employment is one thing that you want to look at. Growth in the labor market, paying a living wage, we talked about that. Policing communities, there's safety issues in a lot of our communities, and so you may see programs to increase the safety, because like we talked about before, when you're worried about safety, that's another thing that keeps you right in the tyranny of the moment. It's very difficult to plan. It's very difficult. You're worried about so many things, and when you add safety into that adds a whole lot of pressure and stress on an individual. And then there's neighborhood associations. One of the things that's interesting about this is that my folks in my Getting Ahead class were from a particular, I had about 6 that were from a particular housing development here in Knoxville, Montgomery Village, and they were telling me that they were looked down upon by their neighbors if they got involved in the neighborhood association, and that it caused problems and that they would never be able to do that, because one of the things we encourage them to do is to speak out, that you have a voice. Talk about what the problems are. Be an advocate for your neighborhood, for yourself, and for your children. What you have to say is very important. But it's interesting, they said, we can't do that. Not in Montgomery Village, we can't do that. If you get involved in that, you get looked down upon, people talk about you, and it causes all kinds of problems. So it's interesting, some of these strategies that seem like they would be really great may be very difficult for somebody who's in poverty. So it's another thing that you have to think about.
I was gonna say, I know of someone who lives in a neighborhood. It's not even one of those units or whatever. It's just a neighborhood.
Mm-hmm.
But her problem is her neighbors. It's
Sure.
not.
Yeah.
There's no neighborhood yet.
So one of the things I added to this, if you want to add it, is childcare for working families. If there were some kind of programs that could be developed where there is affordable childcare for families who are working, because a lot of time you have people that are paycheck to paycheck and paying that childcare. It's really, really difficult. And sometimes they get to the point where they just give up, because it's not, they can't end up affording it. So that's one of the things that would be really helpful. So we talked about the individual behaviors, which is one of the causes of poverty. We talked about human and social capital within our community, which is also a cause of poverty. We're also going to talk about human exploitation. And there's several different types of human exploitation that we're going to talk about. One of those is exploitation of dominated groups for profits. And many things that you will see with this are sex trafficking, sweatshops, you'll see payday lenders, all those predatory lenders out there. There may be the check into cash, the title loan place, all those places like that that really prey on people who are disadvantaged. And all it does is keep them right in their situation. A lot of times you will also see exploitation of dominated groups for markets. And this may be things like, for instance, the meat man. Have any of you heard of the meat man? Heard about that? I didn't realize, I didn't think that like this still existed, but there's a meat man from a particular company, and what they do is they go around low-income neighborhoods and they'll swipe your food stamp card to buy meat. So say I'm a single mom and I'm at home with my 3 children, and all I have left for food is cereal, and I don't even know if I have enough milk for everybody to have the cereal. We may be eating it dry. And a man comes to my door, the meat man comes to my door, and he says, I've got chicken, and I've got this many pounds, and I've got to get rid of it today because, of how long I've had it. And she says, I don't have any money on my food stamp card. He says, that's all right. I'll come and swipe your food stamp card next week. And so what does she do? She ends up paying $8 for a few pounds of chicken. I mean, like, ridiculous prices. When we do the Getting Ahead class, we talk about this. And they say it happens constantly. They have the meat man. They also talk about the ice cream man. They get really torn up over the ice cream man because all their kids want ice cream, and they're paying so much for this one little piece of, where they're like, we think they're predatory. And I don't know that I would go that far, but they were like, they can't stand the ice cream man. So, but anyway, so yeah, the meat man's out there. There's predators all around that try to take advantage of people who are in need. Also, think about if you were a single mom and you had no transportation. Think about that mental model and how long it takes you to get places, and you want to walk to go somewhere. So what kind of store are you going to walk to instead of going to the grocery?
And I think about people. My stepson has twin 3-year-olds.
Mm-hmm.
He has a car with car seats.
Mm-hmm.
And hesitates to go places because of the hassle of packing 2 kids. Can you imagine getting on a bus with 2 kids and diaper bags?
Absolutely. And getting all your groceries on a bus.
Yeah.
So what are you going to do instead? Are you going to walk to the
Gas
corner
station.
store?
Yeah.
Gas station, convenience store, wherever the corner store is. Did you know that the prices at the corner store are way above that of what's at the grocery store? And even at the grocery store, what you may find is that the prices are higher in East Knoxville than they are in West Knoxville. Yeah, go ahead and give those out, Caroline. Yeah. So there was a study done. The Knox County Health Department did a study, and they took a look at that. And what they found is that they typically paid about, I believe it was about $20 more for groceries in the low-income neighborhoods in the Knoxville area. This was actually a study done in Knox County. So you can see that that can be very difficult, and there can be many reasons for that. One of the things, Bob Lupton, or Robert, was it Bob Lupton? That wrote Toxic Charity. When he had moved into a lower income neighborhood, he was really invested in that neighborhood. And one of the things that drove he and his wife crazy is that they had to drive so far to go to the grocery store. And so he started really working on getting a grocery store in the low income community, really wanted it there or whatever. And so he started meeting with all these people, and he met with an owner of a grocery store chain or whatever. And he said, "You don't know very, very much about grocery stores, do you?" And they were like, "No." And they were like, "We don't make our money necessarily on the food. We make more money on the other items that we sell." And sometimes in the low income neighborhoods, they don't purchase those other things. They only purchase the food. So you know how when you go into Kroger and they sell a couch and they have all those different things up there.
Now.
Yeah, they have all kinds of things. That's really where they make a lot of their money. And so it's much more difficult for them to run a business in a more low income neighborhood when all they're purchasing is just the food. So that may be one reason. Yeah.
I was always told that another reason, and maybe you can enlighten me or not, but is that in lower income neighborhoods, a lot of people are paying with food stamps.
Sure.
Same thing with the WIC. So, especially because of transportation issues, you know that the person can't go anywhere else, and you know that they're not paying cash, so you're going to try and take advantage and get a little bit of extra money out of them as well.
Yeah, that may be the
Do
case.
you believe that's true?
I believe that it may be true, especially there's some of these stores that are around that have actually had their privileges taken away. They cannot accept the EBT cards anymore because they've taken so advantage. And when it's discovered, or they'll allow them to purchase items that you're not supposed to purchase with food stamps. And so I know the one right there in Montgomery Village in South Knoxville, the south side, that grocery store there, all their privileges were taken away recently because they were taking advantage, charging more, and then also allowing people to buy, with food stamps like cigarettes or, whatever. And they do try to monitor that and discover that. So stores do take advantage, and they know that they can't, just like you said, they know that they can't. I've heard some folks say, is there more theft, in the lower income areas? I don't know. I don't know if there's more theft or not. And they say they have to, have higher prices because of the amount of theft. I think that's something that goes on pretty much everywhere.
Well, I mean, I had read that the Fellini Kroger, the one on Broadway, was the most profitable Kroger in Knoxville.
Looney Kroger?
Fellini.
A Fellini. I thought you said the Looney Kroger. I said,
No, they used to be called the Fellini Kroger.
Patty told me that.
From the Fellini, like, I don't know, like, apparently he's a movie director. I don't know.
Oh, okay.
I mean, there's like a whole
Wow.
Facebook, like, friends of Fellini Kroger. But, I mean, that used to be my Kroger, and it was crazy. I mean, it was. But
Yeah.
I'd heard it was the most profitable one in Knoxville and had the higher prices because we used to drive to Bearden, the rich people Kroger, and it was cheaper and had
Yeah.
more selection.
Yeah.
See, and that shows a mental model right there.
Yeah.
Fellini and the rich people.
Well, that's what we nicknamed it.
But I mean, that's normal.
I'm
That's
gonna
what
go
we
rich people
do.
Kroger.
And Carolyn actually went to several stores. She went to she went to the Dollar General in Walter P. And I'll let her tell you what she
Yeah, I went to the
discovered.
Dollar General at Walter P. and it's within walking distance, it's right across the street. And then I went to the Kroger off Magnolia and the Kroger in Kingston Pike. And at Walter P., the only thing that was a good price was bread. It was $2.90. Kroger was $3.19, but Kingston Pike was $2.50. You can get a lot cheaper there. Cheerios were $3, and they were $2.29. You go up to milk. They did give a good price on milk, $2.90. So a good number of the staples were higher. Now, what do you not find in dollar stores? Vegetables. You might get a banana, right? So-
Okay. The last one that you see there is exploitation of regions for resources and raw materials. And you can think about the Appalachian areas with the timber and the coal. And this is where companies come in and individuals who don't live in their area come in and they work with all of this and they get all the benefit from it. And the people who live there are kind of left with nothing. They don't benefit from the raw materials that they actually have in their own backyard. They don't benefit from that. So that's an example of that. Okay. So what are some things we can do? What are some strategies that there might be? One thing is we can really, educate ourselves about the current exploitations, really educate ourselves about the predatory lenders that are out there, about the title loan places, really talk to the people that we know and that we're working with, warn them about it, warn them about the interest rate. It's so hard for us. One of the questions that we ask every single person that calls in now, I make sure I ask the question, is tell me about what loans you have. I just make the assumption because they almost all of them have them. I'm so surprised by how many of them have them. The last one that I did like a few weeks ago, I have a guy who is on disability, and he gets about $732 a month, something like that. He has cancer and he is terminal. There's not anything that they can do about it. But he got a $350 loan to pay his KUB over a year ago. Okay? He is at the point now, because the interest rate is so high, he's at the point now where he pays $600 a month for this loan. He has to take out a new loan if he doesn't pay that. And it's gone up. And really, somebody from one of the churches called the place and was like, it's just, don't you feel horrible, or whatever is about to, they didn't really tried to do it in a nice way and tried to get them forgive it, and of course they wouldn't. And technically there is a law that says that they can't take money out of disability checks. But here's how they get around that. They get your account number, your account number. So if you don't pay, it automatically comes out of your checking account. Well, the disability check goes straight into the checking account. So he's been very close to eviction several times because he's paying these loans and he really can't afford this. And the son has a little bit of income that helps with that. But $600 of a $732 disability check should not be happening. And the person that was working was like, I feel really bad telling somebody not to pay their debt. And I'm like, he's paid it 15 times. He was a $350 loan. And so they're really, really, really not good. And so just educating people, educating yourself about it, and letting people that you work with know what's out there. Recognize your own involvement in exploitation. Do you use some of those places? You worked at one of those places? Have you? Things like that. Really pay attention to those things. Do you purchase things from companies who maybe have some exploitation issues? You might not want to do that. Know that there are anti-human exploitation groups and movements out there, specifically with like sex trafficking. There's a brand new group in Knoxville that's working on that. They were going for a few years, and then they kind of switched over a little bit, so it's taken them a little time to get going. But there's been actually like 100 cases in our area that they've had, which is pretty surprising. And so they have this, so you can get involved in the movement. Go attend meetings, find out as much as you can about it, and see how you can help. And then this one, make the system fair. I usually roll my eyes inside my head when I read that, because that is so hard. Because I think we all have the intention to make the system fair, but it's really difficult to do. And again, one of the ways that you can do that is to have everybody at the table, so that you can really talk about how do we do this and how does this affect you, so that we can better understand. So that is human exploitation. So we had individual behaviors, we had human and social capital within the community, and we've talked about human exploitation. Is there any questions that you have with that you want to talk about?
I just keep thinking about these payday loans. When somebody is in poverty and they're desperate, I mean, there's no other fix.
You're right.
What do they do, you know?
You're right. And one of the things that people say is they do provide a service, you know, at that moment, service.
Even
that's
if they're
true.
exploiting,
But there,
you know
there
it,
isn't,
but what
they're
is
not,
the poor
they're not
person do?
eligible for any credit, and so there's a new movement towards micro-lending potentially with some families in poverty where they would be able to take out loans
That would be
at a
good.
bank at a fair limit, you know,
A
with
fair
certain
rate.
criteria and what have you, but I don't think
And it
we really
doesn't
have that
grow.
developed on a wide-scale basis here.
No, we don't. But it's something that we would really love to do.
What we'd like to do, it's done in other communities, and that would be an answer to that. To maybe
That would be
individuals that are working with caseworkers or someone's walking with them, they're really maybe they're getting ahead graduates might be eligible for something like that. But the old thing on TV last night said the average percentage rate on these payday loans, you know, the idea is that you pay them off in 2 weeks or 30 days. Well, they don't, because they have other bills. So the percentage rate, interest rate, was average in this area of 426%.
Oh, I know, it's ridiculous.
426%.
And it's like, unless you get extra money, you can't get ahead of it.
So there's,
You
the
still have to
city
go
is
get it.
looking at trying to limit it, as it said.
And I may be skipping ahead of myself a little bit, but I'll go ahead and say this. I think this is it's in the next part, but just while we're talking about it, it's a good time to say it, is that, you know, there are 23 states who have come up with laws that deal with the predatory lending. And the issue with that is, I mean, it's great that they have these laws. The issue is a lot of times these laws will put it at you can't charge more than like 91% interest, so 91% interest.
Right.
Well, what they saw happen is a lot of people went up to 91% if they weren't there. So, gosh, you have to look at the whole picture. I mean, that was just that right there. Creating that policy was meant, creating that law was meant to really help, but it, you know, hurt in some ways too. So how you deal with it is really hard. It's very difficult to make the system fair. Like I said, it can be real difficult. to
And
do
also, based on my prior experience in the banking industry, it's not just payday lending that's terrible. They happen to be the
Exactly.
most egregious,
Uh-huh.
but even going, my former employer was Bank of America. There are plenty of bad behavior within normal institutions that is ignored because of the egregiousness of payday lending. It's all bad. It's just varying degrees of bad.
Yeah,
So
and
lesser
there-
evil. Yeah.
and there's
And all different levels, just from account management, from checking the savings through credit lending, whether it be short-term credit, medium or long-term, collateralized debt or non.
right.
All of these financial institutions, by and large, are there to rip you off. It's just a degree of how much.
The
Right.
president has done a lot of help with that. Like
Yeah.
a lot of people didn't have the option to opt out of courtesy pay fees.
Mhm.
I know a lot with like my Capital One card, they don't charge the over the limit charge anymore. He's done a lot of legislation with that as well as the payday loans. But when states don't want to fall in line with federal programs, that's
Right.
kind of where the problem is.
And one thing that I read recently about banks and about people in poverty who end up having a checking account, there was something about how if you went over, it just automatically became a loan. You could sign something that it
But
automatically.
It's possible.
courtesy
It's
pay.
usually sold in the guise of overdraft protection. And
yeah.
overdraft protection basically means we can charge you twice, 2 fees for the same problem, both on the entryway as well as the interest on the after the fact.
Mhm.
Another problem that's prevalent is when they tier your charges highest to lowest. The bank would make an argument that, well, your highest payment, well, that's the one we're going to pay because that's the one that probably means the most. But the reason why they tier it highest to lowest is so that we can charge more overdraft fees because of the frequency of occurrence. And there are many things like this
Yeah.
that are prevalent.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. That's a really important point. And one of the other things too that I thought of as you were talking is that it is not just people who are in poverty who are utilizing payday lenders. many of the middle class are paycheck to paycheck, and they might be in the same situation if they lost a job. And a lot of them are using payday lenders as well. And so it's not just the low income, you know, it's also the working poor and those in middle class who are utilizing these payday
You know,
lenders.
what happens in poverty, and well, we've learned this from our Getting Ahead graduates, is when you're in that state of desperation, they do not read the fine print. You can ask them, what is your percentage rate on your loan? They have no idea because they needed that car or what have you. So in Getting Ahead, we had them research that. World Finance was another one that they went to. They researched what the percentage rate was for World Finance for Aaron's rent.
Oh, yeah, we
And
have a
then-
handout that you
yeah.
can actually see.
This was done by one of our Getting Ahead graduates. Because we don't give them this information. If they want to know this, we have them go in the community and find it out themselves. And so she came back and put this together nicely for us. And this was a laptop that she was buying, you know, online from HP Direct, Fingerhut, and Aaron's Rent to Own. So the cheapest place would be $429 for an HP, and Aaron's Rent to Own was $983. And you can see how that's graphed out there. So we encourage them to figure this out before you make this impulsive jump to do, out of desperation, what you need to pay your KUB bill. So it points them towards future planning.
Yeah.
And a lot of our Getting Ahead graduates have actually opened up savings account because they're thinking a little bit, you know, more ahead. Of course, it's not easy to budget on minimum wage. I challenge any of you to do that if you're living on a minimum
Well, and
wage
think
job.
back to the meat man. Remember how kind the meat man was and how easy the meat man made it? It's the same thing with these loan places. You come in, they're very friendly.
Sweet, friendly.
It's a quick
Real finance.
process.
That's
They,
really nice to know.
you know, there's only a few forms you have to fill out. You know, there's the fine print there. They don't, you know, and so they make it, you know, a really comfortable experience and a quick.
When the GA one of my ladies went into World Finance to talk about their percent rate, all of a sudden their demeanor changed and they weren't so sweet and nice anymore at all in explaining their tiered percentage rate.
Okay, so we had the first three, the individual behaviors, the human and social capital within the community, and then we talked about the exploitation. Now let's talk just a little bit about political and economic structures. And some of this we have brought up already as we have talked about the other three causes. But deindustrialization is the exactly what you were talking about, the loss of manufacturing jobs, like you talked about in Michigan. That's happened really all over the community, and it's been especially difficult on small communities that relied on manufacturing companies. It's been really, really difficult for them. There's also an economic term called race to the bottom, and that's where companies are literally racing to get to the place that they can have the it can be the cheapest for them to produce. They can pay the least to their employees where there's less regulation, and so they're racing to that. And so, you know, in communities where you cannot do that and there's more policies, so that's why some of the things have gone, you know, may have gone overseas. Also, there's globalization, which is businesses going overseas and us losing jobs here in our country. Increased productivity is exactly what I believe you were talking about earlier. It is great that we have increased productivity and that we can do so much more and faster now. But one of the results of that is that we don't need quite as many employees that we have. And you know, we talked about how you talked about how machines or robots do something now. I don't know, have any of you ever watched that show, How It's Made? Isn't that cool? My husband, I feel really old, but we watch that show. I mean, all the time we're amazed by these machines and what they can do and how quick it is. You know, and in years past where a person may have taken 3 people to do that job, they don't have to hire 3 people to do that. So it's something that you have to look at. The middle class is shrinking, and we are going to talk a little bit about that in a minute, do a little activity to illustrate that. And then also corporate influence on legislators. And there's an article, if you wouldn't mind passing it out, Carolyn, I'm giving you a workout. There was a really interesting article about corporate influence on legislators. And you know how sometimes you may think that money buys votes, and what this was talking about, it's really not that money buys votes. You know, the voters, their constituents kind of win out every time, but what money does buy is time, so that you can give them information, and so that they can hear more about it. So one example is one senator in here talked about how he had heard from the payday lender companies because there's a lot of people out there who are trying to stop some of the payday lenders. He had heard from the companies that have the payday lending, the title loan places and all of that, but he hadn't heard anything from the people who use those. And so he had half of the story. And it wasn't necessarily, I mean, it felt kind of shady to him, but he hadn't heard from anybody who utilized these loans. And it's because we don't have access. We don't have the money to buy the time that we need, whether it be through fundraisers or different events where you get to meet people, or just going on the Hill where you can, you know how sometimes you can have a day on the Hill where you spend time with different, you know, people who are in poverty don't have that opportunity like people who in wealth do have the opportunity. So that's just an article that you can read later. I found it really interesting. So what we're going to do here is let's do a little bit of an activity just to talk a little bit about how things have changed over the years. And we're going to do 2 time periods, and I believe I need about 6 volunteers. And you don't have to do anything major. So if y'all want to, I tell you what, let's do this. If I could have, I don't know how we're going to do this in this room. Let's do this.
Lobby?
Not upstairs. This hall.
The hall right here, I don't know if we have enough.
That probably works in the hallway, then they can just.
Are there doing classes though where we're
Would we
not?
rather?
Not right in here.
Oh, okay.
We could go out there.
These are offices.
Field
We don't care
trip.
about this.
Okay, but if I could have 6 of you that'll be my volunteers and everybody else will just come and observe.
I know what you're saying about the financial reform.
Oh,
Especially that was headed by Senator Elizabeth Warren. Unfortunately, a lot of that was geared.
Yeah.
uh,
Yeah, I work on changing
Yeah, I mean,
Yes.
Separation. But between 1979 and 2009, there was a big difference. So what do you all think? And I don't have all the answers here, so if you're expecting all the answers, don't expect all the answers. I don't have all the answers. But tell me what you think might have happened, or what was different, or what's happened that's caused this big gap and has caused the middle class to shrink.
Prices went up on everything.
Okay.
You know, and people can't afford what they used to, except for the rich people.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
The living wage began to demand more double incomes instead of just
Okay. Okay.
The housing crash.
Okay.
Increased productivity, I say, is the largest reason, because the benefits of productivity only went to those who were owning the company, the manufacturing, or
Right.
the service that had the productivity. And so the largest gain in productivity went only to the owners,
Especially high tech.
especially
Yes.
tech.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Was there a change in attitude from a we to a me? I'm asking, I don't know.
What do you guys think? She said, do you think there was a change in an attitude from a we
A
to
we,
to a me?
Well, I
Country
don't know if
to
it's
me.
true, but I've always kind of heard in my life it's like now it's the management and us, whereas used to the management cared more, I guess, had actual care.
Yeah.
You know, you knew you were going to stay at a company till you retired.
Yeah.
That doesn't happen now.
No.
or could it be unions? Unions came along and so there was no more, child, like, you know, we got child labor laws. Also, we now had 2 people working, and so.
Mm-hmm.
I like what she was saying about the difference between the majority of the population, or specifically placed individuals in the population, having more of a sense of self rather than a sense of community. That makes a huge difference in the way we interact and treat others.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think there are also some things in the sense that you have to have money to make money. So for example, the continued rising cost of higher education, that for so many people, if you can't afford to be educated, you can't
Yeah.
do anything, and more jobs require an education.
They do.
You know, I've known companies that to get minimum wage customer service jobs, you have to have a bachelor's degree.
Mhm.
Because so many people have them now, that you just don't have a chance at a decent job if you don't get an education.
Mhm.
The military's even changed. I mean, used to the people that were coming out of jail or something, that's what they would do, is go in the military. And now they don't want them.
Mhm.
Now you have to have an education, you have to not be convicted of anything. Yeah.
Okay. Pink?
Yeah, mine is more like in line with what he was saying, as far as the productivity, but I have to give the nerdy history answer of these. I think it's more of the globalization, the interest in trading agreements that we have, a little bit of the thawing of the Cold War. We're in markets where we didn't used to be.
Yeah.
And that affects a lot of people at home because of, as you have up there, the deindustrialization. A lot of people didn't have the jobs, and it's taken us a while to kind of catch up with
Absolutely.
non-labor specific jobs that don't require as much education, and this huge group of people who may not have the abilities that someone with a degree has.
Mhm.
They're left out. There's nothing for them to do but work at Walmart or McDonald's because they don't have those jobs that didn't require as much education.
And even that, you have the human exploitation and the benefits of human exploitation being concentrated on the only person who owns that company or the only person that owns that tech. And so it's basically where only one person benefits from everything the business is doing. Because 1%, that's only 1 out of 100 people.
Yeah.
Obviously, as it is, it is only one.
Carolyn, she wanted to answer.
I wanted to tell you about the two brothers in comparing the 1947 to 1979. That was post-World War II era. And two brothers, my uncle and my father, came out of hardcore poverty from the Depression and went into the war. Came out of the war, and my father got a college education on the GI Bill, and my uncle went into manufacturing. We talked about the loss of manufacturing jobs. So that's a different environment than what we have from 79 to 2009, as you all talked about that era.
I think the political climate has something to do with it, and who's in control of Congress,
Absolutely.
and the tax laws, and all of that stuff that I don't understand. But
Yeah.
This is a hard
and
one.
see, that's a great, that's why it's so valuable. I come back to this every time. That's why it's so important that you have everyone at the table. Because you're not meant to understand. I'm not meant,
Not an
I mean,
economist.
I've been working with individuals on poverty for years. I'm not meant to completely understand the whole political and economic structure. I can't, that's not my expertise, but that's why everybody has to be at the table from every background, from every race. We all have to be at the table, and from every economic group, or we're gonna continue to have, it's going to continue to get, the problems are going to continue to fester and get worse and worse until we get everybody at the table, which is very hard to do. There's so many subjects now that everything is so polarizing, and it separates people, and it's really hard for people to have a conversation, and it seems like people are so one way or the other, and I'm like, actually, you're all right. You got to come together. It's both of those things, and so so you kind of, you have to have that conversation and open yourself up to hearing what other people have to say and how these things are going to affect them. Did you have something?
That's pretty much what I was going to say. Is
Oh.
the polarization now. It used to be you voted for the person. Now you almost have to vote for the party because once they get there, they're going to vote with the party. It's a block vote almost all the way, and that's different from what it used to be.
Okay. So you can see there's all kinds of reasons. So let's talk just a little bit, and then we're going to take a break here. Let's talk just a little bit about what some of the strategies or what some things you can do. Whole system planning is really important. The social health index is something that you can use. I use a whole lot the Kids Count, which you can go online. It's through the Annie Casey Foundation, but you can just put in Kids Count. You can Google it, and it'll give you all this information from how many babies were born with birth defects to how many teen moms to how many children live in poverty. All of those statistics, all those things you can see there, of what the unemployment rate is, and all of those things you can really see. And so when you do whole system planning and you look at the whole community, it makes a big difference because you're looking at everything. Carolyn was a part of Together Healthy Knoxville, and what was a big part of that pulled all different aspects of our community together and really took a hard look at that, and some of their results and the things that they've done are on the Knox County Health Department website, and so it was very valuable. But whole system planning is very important and a key strategy. Use measures of accountability beyond shareholder profit. My employees, really looking at your employees and what's going to make them a better employer, a more healthy employee, because when you have healthy, happy employees, you can benefit from that. It's not just the profit. Create intellectual capital. We are doing everything we can to really educate everyone in our community on bridges. You have a different way that you're educating people in our community. We want to build that in many, many different ways. Create a sustainable economy, which is another one of those things that is huge and is a really difficult thing. And then wealth creating mechanisms that develop the middle class. Things that develop the middle class that don't hurt other classes. That's not the goal. Yeah.
I just wanted to put out there, there's a term that it's still not known by everyone. It's called social entrepreneurships. You can look online for these businesses that their bottom line, there's two bottom lines. They do have to make a profit to sustain themselves, but their bottom line of assisting the community and being socially responsible is just as strong as their need to have that profit. And so when you familiarize yourself with businesses that behave that way, that like Ben & Jerry's ice cream that pays all of their employees $15 an hour and gives them benefits. Yes, their ice cream's a little more expensive, but there's no hydrogenated oils in it. You're contributing to a business that treats its employees well, and everyone wins.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I just wanted to throw that out there, that you can find information on those types of businesses.
Thank you for sharing that.
Social entrepreneurship.
Okay, we've got a handout that is exactly what you're saying. You just never know what we've got left in our pocket. One more.
We're inundating you with handouts.
I'm sorry. I have too much paper. I can talk about it.
Yeah, I've never seen it. I'll recognize it.
This is just a.
Did it phonetically.
I think I got this out of framework. So this handout talks about what she was just saying, which was just so cool. Businesses, what is the human social capital in the community regarding businesses? Businesses that have a commitment first to their local community, second to their employees, and to the bottom line will help grow prosperous communities. So that is exactly what you're talking about. And then analyzing our community, which sort of sums up everything you've been saying, is there a fair shot at a living wage job for people? Is there good education, which what everybody's been talking about? Adequate health care, fair and non-exploitive credit, and rich social capital. If not, then these communities are contributing to poverty. It sort of sums it all up, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. That is a perfect ending.
Yeah.
So, because by understanding the causes of poverty, you're going to understand how and why research is needed in all 4 areas, and you're going to recognize that we need a continuum of strategies. And so what I'd like you to do, we're finished with this module, but what I'd like you to do is go take a break, and when you come back, if you would pull out your causes of poverty that you wrote down earlier, and if you would just try to recognize if you lean in one area or the other, and how maybe you need to broaden maybe that a little bit, and we'll talk about it. Do it when you come back, but right now, take a break.
Let me just say real quick,
Okay.
aren't you enjoying this? I feel like I learned so much. So thank you already. Quickly, 2 things. One is Nancy Sutton, who works in the QEP office, has books. They're called The Framework for Understanding Poverty. That book is a little bit different than the Bridges Out of Poverty book. However, if you would like to, the school has bought 50 of them for faculty and staff and people who work here and students and things to borrow. So if you would like to get one, and I strongly encourage you to get one if you have some time between now and next week, get it, take a look at it. I think y'all are going to have some suggested reading that we can do. But you need to sign that off with Nancy and then be sure that you return that. Yeah, that's it, I think. How long do you want the break to be? When should we be back? 5 minutes?
Just do 10. Do 10 minutes.
Okay.
So people have time to go to the restroom. Yeah.
I think I don't know. I don't want to take it and then not use it.
Well, it would just be a matter of you're borrowing it.
Yeah.
So
I'd like to, I think.
okay. Yeah.
Pardon me. I'd really like to have the other one, but
Well, we may be able to get some. I'm not sure.
okay. Thank you. So print and sign.
It's like a
They're incredible.
Just bring it back here.
You can. My office is in the ELC.
No, that's not what I mean.
The library. Are you on this campus?
Yeah.
Okay. My office is in the tutoring center.
I only teach on Monday nights though, so I'm not around a whole lot.
You can put it in
Yeah, if you
campus
want to
mail
recycle,
and just put Nancy.
Yes, they keep going. There's more handouts. They keep going.
Oh, you're gonna be here next week though, right? You're gonna be here next
I'll be here next week.
And I can just get to you.
Sure. You want one?
Yes, please.
one of your children has like a situation a breakdown and you feel like you need to address the
And I overheard, so I can bring it back next week.
Yeah.
Okay.
at least a little bit. Like,
And then if you're not finished with it and you want to keep it a little longer, we can make other arrangements.
Okay.
Thank you. She's never done it.
Next week I'll bring my
She's never called me just like how are you?
my business card so you'll know where I live.
Sweet. That'll be because I'm at Magnolia, so yeah.
Campus mail.
That's why.
Are we? Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Yes, ma'am.
Because we were having every other Tuesday.
Yeah, then did you text you like on Monday?
We just have to determine what.
Yeah. Can we do it next week? She called me last Friday and was like, I don't know what
I'm very
She's like,
keen.
can we not meet today? Next week?
There are other trainings that go along with
On the sign up thing.
Yes,
Absolutely.
absolutely. You can give it to me, and we will. I'll tell you what, Rusty. Let's is there a pin thing that we can put it in?
Also, if you have any inclination to donate to the snack fund,
Yeah.
feel free to do so.
And education.
Oh, I love these things.
Because the people with you at the center.
Right.
Donating